as you apply your math and physics background to human biology and longevity and things that are really existential in nature, do you ever have to ask the question, not just what can we do, but what should we do?
What's the most precious thing we have as sentient individuals living on this planet? Productive time on this planet, right? What we're developing at Verseon gives you more productive time.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 280. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. We learn from AI thought leaders weekly on this show. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact. James Bourne writes in AI News that the pace of innovation in AI is fierce. And the pace of modernization in the field of ethics needs to keep up. Bourne writes that recent new LLMs from Anthropic, Google, and OpenAI demonstrate the need for the field of ethics to evolve faster. Vendors are saying the right things, but is the public holding them accountable? There are many frameworks for evaluating the ethical use of AI emerging across the US, EU, and beyond. Cites these three principles proposed by the BBC when evaluating the use of AI, as well as related ones published by the German conglomerate Bosch. AI must, in the words of Bourne, always act in the best interests of the public, always prioritize talent and creativity, and always be open and transparent. This is an interesting summary of the questions we should be asking as part of introducing AI into any applications or business processes. Of course, we'll continue to have this important conversation in this space, and we'll share the link to that article in today's show notes. Now, shifting to today's conversation, Adityo Prakash is a serial entrepreneur, high-tech CEO, amateur photographer, and author who decided to leave academia to fix video streaming and is now transforming how drugs are discovered and commercialized. Adityo's current company, Verseon, uses deep quantum modeling and AI to accelerate the process of identifying and developing novel pharmaceuticals that could forever change how we think about aging and healthcare. Adityo holds degrees in math and physics from Caltech and has been awarded more than 40 patents. Without further ado, Adityo, it is my pleasure to welcome you to AI and the Future of Work. Let's get started by having you share a bit more about your background and how you got into this space.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for that intro. We started Verseon almost 20 years ago because we like finding opportunities where different markets are coming together. In this case, it was high tech and biotech merging headlong into each other. And when you have traditional players in each field, they don't know where things are going. And you have the opportunity to build the next big platform company based on fundamental advancements in science and technology, and over time, convert those technology barriers into market barriers. We looked into this field and we said, this has really big impact on people's lives, how we treat diseases. It's going to affect every single one of us and our loved ones, right? And can you do something better? As we looked at the field, we realized that the heart of all drug discovery is trial and error testing. And anything you want to test needs to be made first. And if you look at the total number of drug-like molecules humanity has been able to find or make so far, it's an infinitesimally small fraction of the actual number of possibilities. The current processes of trial and error are not going to get us there. Neither is the current application of AI trained on the existing experimental data. So it needed something fundamentally different and better to be able to systematically, atom by atom, design new drugs. That's what got us into Verseon, and it's been a 20-year adventure. It took us 16, 17 years of the company's life to build all of the core science platform behind what we do. And now we have started using it over the last 5, 6 years to build up a drug pipeline of 16 different drug candidates so far across 8 major disease areas. And each of our drugs promise to actually change the standard of care for the diseases they address.
I've seen you speak about and write about the ability of Verseon to potentially tackle any health issue, any disease, which seems like such a bold statement. Is it the case in your view that we can essentially digitize biology? Is biology ultimately a data problem?
When it comes to understanding of biology, AI will have a huge implication in that, and our ability to actually understand the biology of diseases, disease pathways, how our systems evolve and progress. But that is the first part, understanding how our bodies work, how disease processes progress, what to go after. In the end, you need to figure out what therapeutic molecule you're going to insert into the system to actually intervene in those disease processes, right? So when it comes to finding those drugs, that's where we need some dramatic changes compared to how we are doing that process today. Right now, as I said, we do trial and error testing. Ultimately, our bodies are made of proteins. Our DNA is just a code book for making these proteins. And if there's a protein that's specifically associated with a particular disease, what you want a drug to do when you take that, you want the drug molecules to dissolve in your gut, go through your bloodstream, go find copies of that particular type of protein in your body, bind to them, and prevent them from doing that damage. And what we do is we take these proteins, we dip them down into different little test tubes, which have chemicals made up and stored, and we're looking for change in color or temperature to see, can I find a binder to this protein? That's the brute force trial and error I was talking about. We have automated that. We call it high throughput screening, but ultimately it's still trial and error. Okay. What if instead you could ask yourself, why does that drug bind to that protein? Turns out at that level, it's actually a physics problem. The drug molecule flexes and twists. So does the protein. They form this perfect lock and key fit. The next obvious question to ask is, why can't I, atom by atom, design that perfect binder? Right? This is how we design just about everything else. If you think about, building a big building, the architect tells you how every room will look, where the load-bearing structures need to be. By the time you build it, it works like that, right? The Boeing Dreamliner was completely designed on the computer. Why not drugs? People have been talking about this for 35 plus years. There have been serious attempts at this for at least the last 3 decades. And unfortunately, it's a really hard problem. And people out there in the industry have not been able to crack it. They just don't have the accuracy necessary to be able to design these things atom by atom from scratch. This is what we set out to solve at Verseon. And once you can really do that, you can start with any protein that's involved in a specific disease and go after it and design a drug that'll bind to it and have the right effect. So this doesn't eliminate the need for understanding biology. Absolutely. And like you said, biology ultimately is a hugely complicated setup, but we should be able to tease it out using all of the tools, the experiments the biologists are running, combined with, AI to help us analyze all the correlations that we're seeing across all those test data. We should be able to continue to tease out more and more about the biology and what to go after. But the next problem is just as important. How do you design something that now can go intervene in that biological setting? And that's what we do at Verseon.
So let's take an example that's familiar to every human being. Aging. Biologically, cells break down. Systems just erode over time. This doesn't feel like something that can be fixed with data modeling. I am the biggest AI enthusiast, but it takes a leap of faith for me to think that any amount of data could, quote, fix the aging problem. Am I wrong in my thinking?
Let's look at it slightly differently. We were just talking about diseases, right? What's the number one risk factor for most human diseases? What you just mentioned, aging. Young people have far fewer diseases than old people do, right? But what is happening along that process? We're only starting to understand it, the very beginnings of it in many ways. There are, say, 9 core hallmarks of aging, things that happen in our bodies. Our mitochondria don't function as well as we age. Our telomeres shrink. We build up these huge load of so-called senescent cells, other things like those, right? What are the molecular mechanisms inside our body that lead to these things? we're slowly teasing those out. Okay. But once you tease those out and you say, okay, this is the step that's happening that's leading to the next, thing in the cascade. Eventually we call that, cell aged, right? Once we tease those out, we should be able to have therapeutic targets to go after that, where we can say, oh, if I intervene here, I can actually, if not cure the process, at least slow it down, right? You can think of that treating aging like a disease, okay? A disease where you might not find an ultimate cure, and won't live forever, but, at least just like we treat many other diseases where we're, at least ameliorating the symptoms, you can actually slow down the aging process.
So extending that example, this is a super naive question, but I've got to ask it anyway. So you and the team identify, let's say, a disease or aging or a problem worth solving. You talked about how inefficient the current process of drug discovery is. I get it. Totally makes sense. What do you do differently when you think about this through the lens of AI or data? Like, where do you even start from a whiteboard and the name of a disease to actually commercializing a drug?
Sure. So here is what happens with the current drug discovery process, like I told you, based on trial and error. And even when you apply AI on top of it, your AI needs a lot of data for training, and then it can predict something similar, right? When you feed AI all of the data that's currently been collected on that small pool of chemicals we've been able to make so far, it's not going to get us to those great new medicines of the future that lie in those unexplored realm of possibilities. So far, AI's contribution in drug discovery has been more limited as a result, despite the hype. It has found new uses for old drugs, absolutely, and it can do that. And it has helped design small tweaks to known drug molecules. But AI can't find you new drugs that are radically different from the ones on which it was trained. What we have found at Verseon is that by marrying physics with AI, you can get around the data problem. Physics breakthroughs we call deep quantum modeling allows us to design completely new drugs without the need for prior training data. Because the physics tools are not relying on training data, and I've been told this is what happens and this is what I need to do. The physics tools are literally saying, will a chemical bond form between this particular atom on a drug and this atom on the protein? Okay. Can I now connect this piece of this atom on the drug to a next one? Okay. And create a link that connects somewhere else on the protein as well. So you're latching onto the protein in different places to make sure that this thing, actually will form a good binder. Does that make sense? This is a CAD/CAM, computer design, computer manufacturing problem at the atomic level. This is beyond nanotechnology. This is true molecule engineering, okay, from scratch. You do that, now you can feed all of that new information, the new thing you just designed, to your own AI tools, which can in turn help you tweak and optimize these further and develop drugs that are life-changing for a range of major human diseases. So when you combine the two things, it allows you to now efficiently explore this uncharted chemical ocean of possibilities to find those drugs of the future.
It makes so much sense when you describe it that way. And yet, Big Pharma, as you said, uses trial and error using non-physics-based principles. Why hasn't Big Pharma latched on to using CAD, style techniques like what you're discussing?
Let's not Big Pharma. They have been trying this stuff for a long time, but it's a really hard problem. Unusual solutions often don't come from the usual suspects, right? The next big breakthrough doesn't come from the obvious source, some existing incumbent company often. Big Pharma has been buying tools in this space made by companies like Schrodinger and others for the last 3 decades, right? And they have their own internal efforts as well to do these kinds of CAD/CAM design. It's not a secret. It's been around for a long time. It just hasn't had the accuracy necessary. That's the big problem, that they haven't been able to solve that. To quote Bob Carr, who was the Senior VP R&D strategy for Pfizer, who happens to be an investor in our company, he says, the only reason anybody sells tools in this space is because they don't work. If they did, they'd build their own pharma company. And there's a lot of truth to that. So yes, it has been, the whole idea has been around for a long time, but nobody has been able to turn that corner. And today, pharma is, using their experimental data, feeding it to their own AI tools. And again, the problem is that AI is limited by its own training data. And since we have training data on a small pool of chemicals, all it can do is, rehash those things and give you something rather similar. AI and medicine companies that are just hanging out the AI buzzword, that they're producing things that are small tweaks on existing drugs.
So let's take this journey a step further. So let's say in the lab, you synthetic using quantum modeling, find the right combination of proteins, binding properties, et cetera, that look like it could be a cure to a disease. How do you then replicate it? Demonstrate in the lab that this actually could be a solution. And then I'll pause there. Answer that first before I go on to my next question.
So here is how the process works, right? These physics models can actually come up with completely new drug structure that happens to bind to the protein. The computer says, this is fantastic. This thing will be a really tight binder to the protein in question, do the job that you want. Now it's time to make it in the lab. There is something that needs to be translated from the computer design into the lab. And it's not obvious how to do that unless your computer system can also tell you how to make this new molecule, right? It's not enough for me to just connect up a bunch of atoms, on the computer and say, this could be a good molecule to bind to the protein. The computer needs to now tell me, how do I actually make this thing? Because otherwise, just because carbon is connected to 4 other things doesn't mean there is an actual way to make it in the lab, right? So we had to solve that problem as well. Our system not only designs these new things, it always tells us, here are the synthetic steps, 5, 7, 8, however many synthetic steps you need to go through in the lab to make it. So we follow that recipe, make these completely novel compounds. Now it's time to test it in the lab. There are many things that the computer originally designed to bind on the protein that it didn't know how to predict. Just because it binds to the protein doesn't mean I know if it'll go through my gut lining, right? Whether it's going to be oral or bioavailable, okay? Just because I designed something to bind to the disease-causing protein doesn't mean I know if it's not going to cause some other tox issue in my liver or something like that, right? So now it's time to test them in the lab. We do that testing, but we're testing completely new things that nobody else has ever made before, right? So I'm collecting completely new data as well. And I don't just design one such thing for a particular disease. I design hundreds of different molecules like these, and I'm testing them all. And I'm feeding all of this new data to my own AI, which is working on data that nobody else has, and saying, oh, now that I have seen all of these things that are happening against this protein, and this guy goes through the gut really well, that guy gets chewed up by the liver too quickly, etc. By the way, why don't you mix and match these properties and maybe make this other molecule, okay? AI helps me speed up that drug optimization process, okay? And then I go through this iteration, find the ones that really are ideal, satisfy all the usual tests that you'd run in the lab, handicap a drug to figure out, okay, how safe is it? How good is it? How, non-toxic is it? All of that stuff. And once all those tests are run, it's ready now for human trials. That's how our process works. Easy to say, but hard to do.
Also hard to say, by the way. You're doing a great job of simplifying something that's very complex. I appreciate it. So I'd imagine that you need to supplement the synthetic data generated by the quantum modeling with some kind of patient data to validate some of the, like you said, how does it get processed in the gut? And, does it, how does the liver interact with it?
The initial synthetic data, in AI parlance, you would call that synthetic data. We try to avoid that when we talk to people in pharma because, once you use the word synthetic data, they think you're talking about chemical synthesis. Yes, let's call it virtual data, what the computer designs, and tells you. You have to augment that with a lot of other experimental data that the computer didn't, have any way to predict, right? Yes, this is where the in vitro and in vivo testing comes in. First in test tubes, but going forward in cell-based assays and animals, or all the standard processes work. However, you can actually make that far more efficient. You can automate a lot of that. You can now use your testing on much higher quality compounds instead of just random testing of things. And you're collecting the data from all these biology testing in the lab that I can now feed into my AI. After all that is done and it's in human trials, you're continuing to collect the same kind of data now in whole humans. But before you get into humans, you can do amazing things nowadays with testing on organoids, which are little mini clumps of liver or something else from various different kinds of people, various genotypic differences among them, etc. So you can get a fantastic amount of data before you even have to try it on a human. But then you do continue to collect all of the data on the humans to learn from that.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the regulatory machine, like the FDA in the United States, isn't ready to evaluate some of these kind of drugs developed with novel new techniques, physics-based, AI-based. What's your sense of at what point will it be normalized that this is going to be how drugs are developed as opposed to the traditional trial and error method?
When it comes to drugs going through trials, the FDA is not to blame. They're doing the job of being the gatekeepers to eliminate the junk, right? And when you do all of the standard batteries of tests that are required before you enter human trials, okay, by then the drug has been characterized to a decent level. And what you do in trials, it does not matter how the drug came about. If you designed it using AI or physics or whatever else, or any other combination of things, or somebody just handed it down from the heavens, doesn't matter. You have run through all the standard batteries of tests. You've submitted the data saying that this is what the drug does in liver assays, and this other thing in these heart tox assay, etc. It's looking good. After that, the human trials are what they are, right? It doesn't matter how the drug came about. And that should not necessarily mean that the FDA is somehow ill-equipped to test these drugs or evaluate these drugs. But that's only a part of the overall answer. Should we make our clinical trial processes more efficient? Should we make the FDA review process more efficient? The answer, if you ask any biopharma CEO, will be obviously yes. That is a different problem in many ways. And that process should be made better and more efficient, potentially. That it probably requires the FDA just having more resources, being more proactive about speeding up the approval of these things. The FDA is trying to a large extent, but it can be made better. There is one other thing that we see coming that we are actually big fans of and we're doing it ourselves is there will be more and more AI-driven trials. This has nothing to do with how you found the drug. This has to do with how you analyze the trial data, how to slice and dice what's working and what's not working, and maybe also continually adapt the trials based on the data that's coming through. This is unusual for the FDA, and that will make trials more efficient. And the FDA needs to evolve and adapt to that. I think that'll take a lot of people in the industry going and banging their heads against the regulators before they change and adapt.
I gotta ask you a related question. So you're a math and physics guy from Caltech, and as technologists, we get really excited about the art of the possible and solving problems because we can solve problems. But as you apply your math and physics background to human biology and longevity and things that are really existential in nature, do you ever have to ask the question, not just what can we do, but what should we do? Maybe, the planet has a carrying capacity, and maybe humans were meant to be on the planet for a certain amount of time, and maybe Darwinism dictates, how and when and where we should be able to live. Does that ever enter that kind of whiteboard discussion that you're having with your team about, what we should do?
That's a deep philosophical question. Let's break it down. All right. What's the most precious thing we have as sentient individuals living on this planet? Productive time on this planet, right? What we're developing at Verseon gives you more productive time. Is that a bad thing? No. You just talked about planet's carrying capacity, other things like those. There are other systemic problems that need to get solved to lower that burden, right? The planet probably should not continue to indiscriminately increase the human population, okay? We don't need 8 billion people on our planet, with the consumption level per capita that we, for instance, use, in the US, right? We certainly can't, under current technology, sustain it. In any event, we probably don't need that. That is a different problem. That's a systemic problem that we need to solve. We are already seeing when countries reach a certain level of socioeconomic, growth, and women get educated, especially, you see slowdown of population growth. That's actually, in many ways, a great thing. Our economies are built on measuring growth by number of headcounts that are growing and more consumption happening. We probably need to rethink that whole paradigm, how we look at all of that stuff. I can't solve those things necessarily, but what I can do is give you more productive time on this planet so you can go solve these other problems.
It's a good enough answer. It's a tough one, and I know that you think a lot about these things as well as the daily drug discovery process. I have time, but I'm not letting you off the hot seat without answering one last very important question. Here we are in the middle of 2024, and we're taping this, and I want to know when Adityo and Dan are having a version of this conversation in the middle of 2034. How has the conversation changed? Is it just a given that this is how drugs are discovered? And, are we looking at longer health spans, even in the next 10 years? What do you think will be different about this dialogue?
We hope that by combining all of the major breakthroughs in biology and insight of, how disease pathways work, including, age-related degeneration treated like a disease and all of that stuff. The progress we are making, including all the help that AI is going to give us, when you combine that with these massive breakthroughs in physics and engineering, like we're developing at Verseon, we would have a steady stream of new medicines treating all human diseases far better than we can today. Okay. The way we measure success at Verseon, internally, we talk about this all the time, is that we want to reach a day when people look back and say, how did we do anything without this?
I said that was the last question, but I've got to ask you one last one. Your personal journey is fascinating. So if you could have a conversation with that kid graduating from Caltech, and now knowing what you know now about the arc of your career, what advice would you have for that kid?
Find things you absolutely love doing, things that can make a difference in people's lives and give you a lot of fun in the process. Go do it, pursue it, with all the might you have, and be willing to roll with the punches, adapt, evolve as you go forward.
I know that philosophy extends to your creative pursuits as well. I had a chance to look at some of your artwork, your photography, your writing, and you're very skilled at both. So I know that you've taken that advice.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Excellent. Hey, Adityo, it's been really fascinating. Where can the audience learn more about you and your personal journey and the work of Verseon?
My personal website, adityoprakash.com, gives a sort of less formal take on my background, and it has my photography and other things like those. But really, what we're doing at Verseon, the Verseon website provides a fair amount of information, but we always encourage people to sign up under our community page, and we will provide them more information on how medicine's changing, what's coming. We all are consumers, customers of this, right? None of us were born with an owner's manual on what to do. And we should pay attention to what's happening to our bodies and what is coming that can actually help us and our loved ones live better, healthier, longer lives.
It's a big statement, but I think I can speak for all of humanity when I say we're rooting for you and for the team to succeed. So best of luck.
Thank you, Dan.
That is all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from People Rain. And of course, we are back next week with another fascinating guest.